Hi friends and colleagues, I'm Nadav Hexelman and welcome to the ladder tutorial series. Today I'm going to show you how to finalize our ladder procedural creation. So the idea here is to create procedurally a collision box along our ladder, a collision box that's going to fit the entire height of the ladder. And this collision box, the moment we are playing our game and if our character is approaching the ladder and it's close enough hitting this collision box that we are about to create, it's going to change its mode into climbing from walking. Okay, so let's start creating this collision box. So I'm going inside my blueprint here of the ladder. And this is the way, this is how we finished last episode, just creating a loop here that creating the ladder itself section by section. And now I'm going to add a collision box. I'm going to click here at component and type box collision. And the reason I'm adding a box collision not procedurally as I did here with the static meshes is because I would like to manipulate it later through the viewport to the editor, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So I'll give it a name. Let's call it player climb. Check. Hit compile and let's look at it. So you can see here we have our little box here, and now we want to make sure that it's going to fit this entire ladder automatically. So how do I do that? First of all, I know now that I want my construction script to do many new things to add to our procedural workflow already happening here. So in order to do that, I can add a sequence node here. I'm just going to type sequence. And this is a flow control node. And using this node, I can add new executions here. And they're going to follow each one after the other, running through this sequence. Okay, so it's going to start with the loop. And the second thing we're going to make is the logic that's going to bind the box to the ladder. So I'm going to I'm taking the box here into the blueprint itself, and here I can, out of this box, I can type in here the function set extent, set box extent. So this function allows me to set the size of the box. Okay, it's important to understand here that what I'm changing is not the scale. It's not as if I'm using the scale, but actually, if you look inside our box here, you see here we have a box extent, okay, which works a little differently from scale. It actually needs some kind of unit in each axis, and the way it's calculated is that you see here the number 32. What it means that it pushes 32 in this direction and 32 in the other direction for each axis. So it means that if we put 32 here on the x-axis, actually the entire x is 64. Okay, so it's 32 times 2. 32 to this direction and 32 to this direction. Okay, so this is how extent works. It's important to understand that. So I'm going to set the box extent. I'm going to set this box extent. Okay, and I want to set it automatically on the z-axis, and on the x and y-axis I'm going to put some values manually. So let's split this struct. And let's first give it a x and a y. So let's give it 25 and 25 on the x and the y. And let's hit compile, and we can already see that it's squishing our box down because it has 0 on the z-axis, right? But it's bigger on the x and the y, And now to find the height, I'm just going to take the number of rungs, right, and multiply it by the height of the section. So this should give me the ladder height procedurally. Okay, if I'm plugging it here, let's look at that. Compile. So what we're seeing here is the box is too big, of course. Why is it too big? Because as I mentioned before, this is a box extent, and the box extent is working to both directions. So the number we are, let's say we said, say we have just one rung. So what are we having here is 45 on each direction. So actually we're getting a 90, not a 45. So what do we need to do is divide this by 2 just to get the correct amount. And now you see that the box is the same size as the ladder and also changes procedurally. But the next thing we need to take care of is to make sure that the box actually is fitting the ladder section, each ladder, the entire ladder exactly in the middle, right? Because here now it starts from the center of the scene, and we needed to start from the center of the ladder. So also this is really simple to accomplish. The next thing I need to do is just to set the relative location of my box. So I'm going to grab it again. I'm going to type set relative location here. Plug this in, split the struct, and in order to get the center point, we actually need to do the entire the exact same math. So we're just getting the length, right, of the z-axis and dividing by 2. So this will give me the center. So I'm grabbing this again, just copy pasting. Okay, and let's hit compile. Perfect. And now, as we can see, we can look at it outside, that our box here is it fits the ladder perfectly procedurally. Now, in order to make my procedural workflow even better, next thing I would like to do is to give myself the ability to change the static mesh comprising the ladder section in the future. So this is perfect if, let's say, this is just a blockout ladder and I'm going to change each section later, or I'm going to make, let's say, a few other ladders with different sections, and I want to make my code understand the section height without me needing to plug in here the number of the height, and also to give me somehow the ability to change the sections mesh here from outside the editor, okay, for each ladder, for each blueprint. So how do I do that? First of all, I'm gonna go to the variable. I'm adding a new variable, and let's call it static mesh type, object reference, and let's give it a name. Let's call it ladder section mesh. This variable is going to hold the ladder section mesh that I'm going to plug in inside each blueprint and change how it looks. And here I can choose on the right which mesh I want as a default. Let's type in ladder. This is the ladder we made in Blender. It's going to be the default. And let's open the little eye here and put it under ladder setup, compile, and we can from outside now see that we can choose which ladder section mesh we are using for our ladder from here, but we haven't plugged that in yet. And to do so, what I need to do is, you see here under edit static mesh, I can actually, there's an output here of the component, and from it I can type in get static mesh, or set static mesh, actually set static mesh. And this way we are doing, if I click here on my node of adding the static mesh component, you'll see if you remember, here I can choose which static mesh it's spawning as it's creating the component itself. But actually now I can clear this, and I can, using this node, I'm doing just the same thing, although I can now plug here the variable from outside, and I can procedurally change. So whatever I'm choosing here, if we say, if I'm just gonna, let's type in sphere so you can see, so just any sphere. So you see now we're changing it from outside, okay? But we have a few problems. If you can see again, as you can see, it doesn't now it doesn't divide the section as well as it did with the ladder, because the height of the sphere is different than 45, and also we have a problem with our pivot. Okay, so we also need to fix that. So let's see how we go about doing that. First of all, how to get the section height procedurally. So here in my sequence, I want to add a new node, a new output. I'm gonna just reroute here, holding Control and dragging. Okay, and now let's take our variable. Okay, and from here I can just type get bounds. Okay, and I can split the struct. And what this function does, it's taking my my section itself, the section variable I brought in, and it's creating around the mesh a virtual box that it tries to fit the mesh inside as snugly as possible. Okay, so what I want to do is get the height of that box, and that height is gonna be equal to the height of my section. Okay, so you see here, return value box extent. I'm going to split this, and I'm looking for the return value box extent z. Okay, so let's create ourselves a new variable, and we'll call it ladder section mesh height. And now we're going to set the variable. I'm alt clicking and dragging, and I'm connecting the extent z. Okay, that's the height of the virtual box. And I'm just going to clean up here a little bit. Spaghetti. Let's put this under. Okay, so our code is going to be more readable. Okay, and now I'm just going to need to change here wherever I typed in the number manually, 45, I'm going to use the procedural amount that we are receiving through our code, our new code, right? So instead of going here manually and find this height, my code is doing this for me. And now I'm hitting compile. Let's see what happens. So we're having an issue here. So our the height doesn't seem right. The reason for that is that, as you remember, get bounds is giving us the extent back. And this extent, let's say our box is 45 on the z-axis. So actually we're getting 22.5. That's the amount, and it's not enough. We need a 45, so we need to multiply it by 2. Right, so let's multiply by 2. I just typed the multiply symbol, and now our ladder is back to work. It's back working. Okay, working pretty good. And next thing I would like to do is to check. Let's see what happens if let's say I put here something else like a cube. So you see, when we put a cube, we're having a small issue here that the bounding box is set wrong, right? It's there's a slight offset here. The way that the bounding box is encompassing our box. So let's fix that. If you can look here in the viewport, let's change it here for a second. Okay, so you see, let's go to wireframe, that our box has a slight shift in like a slight offset to where it's located now that we're having a box. The reason that's happening is because we have different pivots if you can see here, our box, the pivot of our box is actually centered inside the box, and the pivot of our ladder is actually starting from the bottom of the ladder, and it's different. Okay, instead of being here, or instead of this being here, they're different. So we can solve it in a few ways. First of all, we can make sure that whenever we're creating our 3D model, we are keeping the pivot here. But we want to try to fix this problem also inside our procedural workflow, and to make it as pivot agnostic as we possibly can. So in order to do that, I'm going back to my construction script, and now I want to add the offset amount of the pivot to the box. Okay, the idea here is that if the pivot is at 0, the way it should, it's offsetting 0, so it's doing nothing. But if the offset is the parts of the box are below the center, okay, so I'm going to take the amount it's below the center and offset it back to the box. That's the idea. In order to do that, I can use a function here that it's called, we're going to grab our section mesh again, and we're going to add here a function get bounding box. Okay, so it's doing the same thing, just returning different values. Now it's really returning the box itself, the virtual box around the section mesh, and we want the minimum value of the Z. All right, so we want, if we can look here, we want this part of the box to see how low it is, the minimum along the Z. All right, again, the ladder, the minimum along the Z is going to be 0, and in our cube it's going to be minus something. Okay, minus something, and we want to take this minus and lower the box along that number. So all we have to do is to add this placement. Remember, here we are placing the box, okay, in the center. We're just going to add this here and reroute this. Some cleaning. Okay, let's say it's good enough. And let's look in our viewport. So now you see our box is in our bounding box is inside our ladder. If we go back to the ladder mesh we had, it still fits. It still fits. Okay, if we change it to a sphere, fits. Okay, it doesn't really fit here. Because I'm getting I need the Z, okay? Sorry, my bad. So now that we change it to Z as we should have done in the start, we look again, now it fits. It worked when I mistakenly plugged in the X because the box is completely square and it's the same on each side, right? So if I, like, the wrong offset of the X is the same number, so I accidentally saw it working. Okay, so looking for him outside here, we can also see here, let's pick something else, I don't know what, cameras. Everything fits inside our box. Our box is being generated correctly. Perfect. Last thing I would like to do before I finishing things up is to give myself some wiggle room with the position and size of this box, of this collision box that I'm creating. So first of all, let's do it for the size of the box. I'm going to add a new variable here, and we're going to call it player check climb check box size. It's extremely long variable name. hit compile, and let's give it a default number of 25 and plug it in here in our extent by first dividing it by 2 as we do with the extent, and we're going to plug it here and here. Let's open the I and put it inside our setup. So what I'm doing here is just changing both the x and the y together, but of course you can do it separately with x and y separated. And now here in our set relative location, we're going to change the offset on the x axis because our y should stay the same centered, but the x we would like to move. So I'm going to drag from here, click promote, and just going to type here player climb check box offset x. Okay, default will be 0. And again, I'm gonna open the little I here, drag it under ladder setup, hit compile. And now looking at our ladder from outside, we can see that we can actually control the size of the box, right? And the location of the box. So let's say I can put the box here on the X, so whenever our player is approaching the ladder from this side, he can climb, but from this side it won't register as an overlap and he won't be able to climb. So the ladder can be climbed from only one direction. Perfect. So we are done with creating a ladder procedurally, finally. And next lesson, I'm going to show you how to give the player the ability to climb as he gets on this collision box. Okay, he's going to immediately switch to climbing mode without pressing any button other than keep pushing forward. So I hope to see you in the next video, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can stay updated with the new videos when they are ready. Thank you for joining, and see you next time.